Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast, where we dive deep into the intersection of career, family, and finances. Learn the mindsets, tips, and strategies to help you on your personal journey to build a life of abundance and purpose for you and your family. Now here's your host, Aaron Amin. Welcome back to another episode of the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Dan from Landlord Horror Stories. Landlord Horror Stories is a relatively new podcast. It's been out for a couple of months where investors share their worst day in real estate. So some of the crazy experiences they've had at their properties, things that have gone wrong. It's not only bad though. Every episode comes around and shares what they did to solve that problem and how they went on to succeed as real estate investors. It is an amazing show, and Dan also holds a very special place in my heart. He was the first person to ever have me on as a podcast guest. So we'll talk about that a little more in the show, but that appearance really changed the trajectory of my life and led me to launch this show. So I am very thankful to Dan for the role he played in my journey, and I'm excited for you guys to hear the interview. Let's get into it. All right, welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today I am here with Dan from Landlord Horror Stories, one of my favorite new podcasts. Rather than me describe it and butcher it, I would love for Dan to introduce himself in his own words and tell us about the podcast.
What's going on, Aaron? Thank you so much for having me on. Yes, Landlord Horror Stories, it's a show that I launched maybe, 2 months ago. And it's where I bring on real landlords. They tell true stories about just all the horrible things that can happen in the real estate world, and then how they found ways to overcome and to solve those problems. So it's been a crazy ride over the last couple of months, but it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, so Dan and I met, I want to say it was back in May. He previously ran an earlier version of this podcast called the Resilient REI podcast. And if you look him up on Twitter, I think that's still the handle you can find him under. But I have to just, before we go any further into the interview, I have to say a big thank you to Dan. He was the first person to ever have me on as a guest on a podcast. And that experience really was a fork in the road for me. When he invited me on, we were talking on a Twitter space about long distance real estate investing. I think you asked me about like 45 minutes before we were supposed to hit record. So I didn't have a ton of time to prepare, but we jumped on and we had a really, insightful conversation. He asked great questions, and it got my wheels spinning about this whole podcasting thing. I kept listening to your podcast for a while after that. And then ultimately it was a huge inspiration in starting this show. So I just wanted to publicly say thank you for doing that. And I've also been really enjoying, following your evolution. And you took that show, which was already very well aligned with the message that I promote about your kind of everyday real estate investor. And now you have this new, very unique show that really dives deep into problem solving for real estate investors. So I love what you do, and I appreciate what you've done for me as an investor.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's really cool to hear. And Aaron, I've been really enjoying your new show, your hybrid real estate approach. And I think that your message is really important. The whole message of people don't need to burn the boats, that you can love what you do in your W-2, that you can make plenty of money as an employee and build out real estate and do real estate full time over the course of maybe 5, 10, or 15 years. That you don't have to all of a sudden do it in 6 months. And I think that that's a message that not a lot of people out there are hearing, but I think that's it's a message a lot of people should be hearing. So it's just crazy what was it, a Twitter space, a random Twitter space a couple months ago has led. So really proud to see how you've grown and you've developed as a content creator.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's those serendipitous moments online are happening more and more. I try and make at least a little bit of mention on each episode. Every one of my guests is someone that I met online through either social media or a mastermind. And so I encourage people who are getting into their real estate journey, whether or not you love social media. There are many things I don't like about social media, but it is definitely a valuable tool for networking and ending up having conversations such as this one. I encourage people to find ways to engage in ways that fit in with their lives, that don't compromise their values, but still allow themselves to, put themselves out there. So yeah, and you've been on social media, I think, for a while, and that was a big part of, it's still a big part of your like content strategy, right? Is being online in addition to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm 29, so social media in some form or fashion has been around for most of my adult life and then a good chunk of my adolescent life. And I think that what social media does very well is that it tries to build silos, because if you're an Instagram, if you're a Twitter, your whole goal is just to keep people on platform so you can serve them more ads. It's just how you make money, frankly, through getting more impressions, more eyeballs. So they want to create an experience that you're going to keep on coming back to and that you're going to spend more and more time on. So if you're focused on real estate and you build your social media around real estate, that could be super beneficial, right? It builds out your network. You're able to talk to people. You're able to problem solve in real time. I can't tell you how many times selfishly I've encountered a problem in my own real estate journey and just tweeted out, hey, how would you approach this? How would you solve this? And having 2, 3, 5, 10, or even more people coming in and saying, I'm a landlord from Wenatchee, Washington, like yourself, and this is how I would approach a situation. But if you don't do that, if you just approach social media from a what's cool or dog videos or cat videos, then it can just be a huge time suck that you really don't get anything out of. So if you're going to be on social media, I think it's really important to maybe have a goal on what you're trying to get out of it, right? You can't entirely avoid the time suck that comes with social media, but at least you can try and expand your network and try and benefit from all that social media has to offer.
Your account is one of my favorites to follow because you do a great job of threading the needle of good quality information, and then there's also some entertainment. I remember there was a month, maybe a month or two ago, you were posting all these AI generated photos of here's what AI says a typical landlord looks like in X state. And those were cracking me up. And then yeah, every once in a while you post these things that this is your daily reminder that real estate is passive. It's like a picture of a house burning down or
Yeah.
something like that. Those always crack me up.
Yeah, and I think that what my approach to social media is, I never want to be like the oracle of truth. I think there are so many people out there who want to be like the thought leader, the guy that you go to for all the answers when it comes to real estate, and there's thousands of them. And there's also a couple that do it really well. Mike Zuber of One Rental at a Time. He's been in real estate for 20 years. He owns like 200 units. He does a daily YouTube video on like the financial news and how it's relevant to us landlords. I can't compete with him. He's a genius. He's great. My whole approach to social media is, what can I do to get people to interact? What can I do to bring people to the table? What questions can I ask to bring people who are really seasoned and know what they're talking about to share their insight so that we can all just become a little bit better? I've been doing real estate. I've owned real estate for 3 years. I've been passionate and learning about real estate for about 6 years now. So I know that I'm not the smartest real estate nerd in the room, but maybe there's a way that I can bring smarter real estate nerds to the table to pick their brain a little bit. And that's what a lot of my content is all about, is trying to bring people in to try and kind of foster community, mainly on Twitter.
It's great to have such a clear goal for your time. Like you said, being intentional about the time you're spending online, the time you're spending on the podcast. Yes, I'm sure you have a lot of fun with it, but you're also providing value and a service for the real estate investor community. And I think there's a really unique value with your new podcast, right? The Landlord Horror Stories, where I was sharing this right before we hit record. When you first launched this idea, I was a little scared to listen to it because I've had a few horror stories myself, but it's stuff you don't like to think about as especially as a newer investor. People dread that the quintessential nightmare 2 a.m. plumber call. Like even that is a nightmare for a lot of people, even though I've never received one. And I actually don't know anyone who's ever received a 2 a.m.
Yeah.
plumber call. But your stories are a lot more detailed. And what I like about it and what I would say to anyone who I hope will go listen to it after this episode is that you always bring it around and you always tie it together with some sort of lesson and some sort of like positive outcome for the investors that you're talking to. And you even have a sign off at the end of the episode. I forget exactly what it says, but it's something to the effect of there will be setbacks, you will have things go wrong, but everything can be solved if you apply the right attitude and work through it. And even have different investors come on and record that outro, which I think is it's a really cool touch. And so what have you learned? I forget how many months you are into the new concept, but what are some things that you've learned from doing this that you maybe didn't know before?
So I'm about 2 months in, about 9 episodes, all depending on when this episode gets released, are out there, out in the wild. What I've learned from it, my approach with the show is to bring on people to have just to hear their worst day or days in real estate. And there have been some real bad days that I've had on my show. And like I said, I try and bring it back to some positivity, to what they learned, and really just give some optics to people who have. I wanted to build a show that even if you're not into real estate, right, but you just want to hear a good story, you could still get enjoyment and you could still like the show. But I wanted to end things out with, what did you learn, and some positivity. And one of the questions I always ask is, has real estate been a net positive or a net negative for you financially? And people will come on and just talk about just really tough situations. Probably the most significant that came to mind was a attempted suicide in an ADU, and the landlord was living in the back house, and he was awoken at 10 o'clock at night. Or he wasn't awoken, but he was brought out at about 10 o'clock at night to ambulances and police, and it was so severe, the wounds this guy did, that they started investigating it as a homicide. It was that intense of an attempt. And you hear stories like that, and to a person I've had on the show, all of them has said, no regrets, real estate, net positive on my life financially, no questions asked. And that surprised me a little bit. I was surprised that maybe some people would be a little bit more reticent. So it just is, it's really reinforcing that, hey, this is not an easy business that we're in. It's a people business, it's a service business, which is not the easiest type of industry to be in. But at the end of the day, you can make money, and it is a robust way to make and retain wealth.
So one important nuance there I want to continue to highlight, as I try always to do, is that you say it's not you use the word business, right?
Hmm.
It really is a business. You're setting up a business. You have responsibilities that come with that. Even if you have a property manager, even if you have a rock star team, it's still a business that you have accountability for. And I think that's, maybe there's an identity shift that happens at some point when you buy real estate, where you have to understand that you are an investor and you are a business owner. And if you try and treat it like buying a couple of shares of Apple in your brokerage account, you might end up on Dan's podcast with your own horror story of negligence, because you do have to treat it as a business. You do have to set it up and run it. And I think the sooner people kind of wrap their heads around it, there are ways to set it up and streamline and automate, use VAs, use
Hmm.
software, but you do have to be intentional about setting up the right kind of business. So I highlight that nuance because I know for me, when we bought our very first rental in Las Vegas in 2019, we went in with the mindset of, this is going to be a business. And I think that's part of what allowed us to lay a good foundation. We learned how to self-manage. We learned how to use all the aforementioned software tools. And by doing that out of the gate, we learned a few things up front that allowed us to scale without losing control of our portfolio. Is that a shift that you made early on in your investing journey and that you've noticed in your guests too?
I think that when it comes to saying that it's a business, right, let's just be clear. It's not like starting a restaurant. It's not like starting a retail shop or something like that, where there's a 90% chance that you're going to fail, right? Like, real estate is a very forgiving asset class. There, you can mess up a lot of times, but so long as you hold and you bought right, you're probably going to do okay. If you bought with a decent interest rate, let's say in 2021 or 2022, even if you overpaid for it, you're probably going to do all right in the long term because your monthly payment is probably pretty low. What I get caught up on, and this might deviate from your question just a little bit, is the people who almost take like a crypto approach to real estate. And what I mean by that is people who want to get a property for as little money as humanly possible, right? Create a financing and subject to on their very first deal because they have no money, because they haven't learned the basics of budgeting. They haven't learned the basics of being able to qualify for a mortgage. They're just like, hey, if I'm able to get a property for no money out of my own pocket, like, why should I do anything else? Right. And it just seems the people who kind of peddle that are a little bit disingenuous, because there are a ton of risks. There's are a ton of risks when you buy real estate, especially if you go outside of the normal channels, right? You have legal risk. You have a ton of risk when it comes to title. And also, just if you haven't learned how to budget and save 20 grand, and I don't mean to sound high and mighty because 20 grand is a lot of money, kind of no matter where you're at on the spectrum, 20 grand is a lot. It buys you a lot. If you haven't learned how to save that money, what happens when that house that you bought for no money out of your own pocket, but you need a new roof, or a window is leaking pretty intensely and you need to replace it, right? And all of a sudden you have a 10 or 15 or 20,000 plus dollar repair bill that you have. If your only strategy in a situation like that is putting it on a credit card and then paying off that credit card or paying off the minimum, God forbid you hold the balance, right? That's not a business approach, right? That's not an investment approach. That is just taking a course or whatever the case might be and just hoping that this is going to work out. And from a business perspective, we don't hope, right? Like we plan, we prepare, and if bad things do happen, right? Like we're not hoping that they're going to get better on their own. No, we're going out there and we're solving it and we're fixing it. And that's just how it is.
Yeah, I think you have to have a CEO mindset, right? And the CEO is responsible for all the domains of the business. So even if you're great at finding deals, if you don't know how to operate, if you don't understand the mechanics of dealing with tenants, if you don't understand how to budget and be financially responsible, you can find all the deals you want, but the job in some ways starts the day that you close on the property. It doesn't end with the acquisition, especially if you're planning to hold for the long term. So I think I don't say that, oh, it's a business and you have to be a CEO to scare people away from doing it. I say it's just to
Yeah.
remind people that there's some responsibility that goes with it. And I think that's important to realize out of the gate. And if you're looking for true 100% passivity, then directly owning real estate might not be what you're looking for.
Yeah, there's ways you can get passive income through real estate. And as much as I joke about how real estate is not passive, and I'll put a picture of a house burning down, there's ways that you can get pretty close to it, right? Like a syndication. You sign up with a syndicator who knows their stuff, who's got a proven track record. You're not out there swinging a hammer or managing that property. Somebody else is doing that job for you. You're just supplying the money. There are risks associated with that, and there's plenty of horror stories that I haven't had on my podcast, at least not yet, where you sign up with a syndicator and the guy ends up running off with your money. That's happened a bunch. So that's certainly not passive, but when done, a syndication can get fairly close to a passive investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Within real estate, there's a number of different directions you can go. I think for me, my honey hole so far has been the single family long-term buy and hold.
Yep.
And even as I continue to grow and figure out what's next for me, it's still probably going to remain within that direct ownership, long-term rental model. So we're not here to talk about me though. I want to hear and you unpack what your personal real estate journey has been thus far, how you got into it. You mentioned you've been interested for 6 years, investing for 3 years. Can you run us through that journey so far?
Sure, absolutely. As all great journeys start, it starts with a podcast. Darren, so I was in college at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So I'm a Chicago boy, born and raised. I've got a little bit of a cold, but you can probably get the Chicago accent out of my voice even still. And I started a podcast where I would run around the Chicago startup ecosystem, right? People who are starting companies or investing in startups. And it was very similar to my original show, my Resilient Real Estate Investing show, where I just bring people on, I'd talk to them and try and see if I couldn't force a narrative or something or put together some interesting content. It was not very good. I learned a lot about podcasting and the importance of good audio. But towards my senior year of college, I realized the show, it's got maybe, I don't know, 200 downloads an episode. So I'm not going to be able to graduate school and work on this full time. So I decided, okay, why don't I use this platform to get the best possible job? Let's just use it as a recruiting or a way to me to have a conversation with a VP and be like, hey, are you guys hiring, or do you have a hiring manager I might be able to speak to? That kind of stuff. So I was able to get connected with one person who got me connected with another person who ended up getting me connected with, I think it was the head of HR or the head of recruiting at a company called Outcome Health. And Outcome Health was like a unicorn of all unicorns here in Chicago. They had raised $550 million in 1 year, which is the second most any startup in Chicago has ever raised. You go into San Francisco and probably New York, and startups are raising $500 million every other week. But in Chicago, $550 million, that's a lot of money. And to put that kind of in perspective, the number one raise for any startup in Chicago in 1 year was Groupon, who raised about $900 million way back when Groupon was considered a successful company. They had a little bit of a fall from grace. But anyway, so I got hired at Outcome Health, and they do TV monitors and touchscreens. The technology was really cool in the doctor's offices. So if you can picture it, their main product was this touchscreen that was the size of a 32-inch TV. It was mounted portrait, and the doctor, if you go in and see your cancer doctor or your dermatologist and you had questions, they would go to this and they'd be all these 3D models. So let's just say, God forbid, you have lung cancer, Aaron. You can go in there and the doctor could walk you through the different phases of lung cancer, be able to zoom in, zoom out, rotate 360 degrees. It was really cool. So I got in there as an entry-level sales guy, and about 3 months into the job, we were all pulled into a conference room, and our sales manager, who was probably 30 at the time, she looked at all of us and said, "The Wall Street Journal is going to be coming out with some fake news, and don't believe any of it. It's all fake," and was very vague, but just basically said, "Hey, there's some stuff coming down the pike, and I don't really know, and just don't believe it and don't talk to any reporters." What ended up happening over the next following 3 months, so basically the other half of my tenure there, was the company getting exposed for embezzling and cooking the books and basically stealing that $550 million, lying to customers, lying to clients, lying to everybody. And it was really a unique situation to be in after college, in seeing a company that up until that point we had so much respect for. We were being told how lucky we were to work for this company, to all of a sudden people are like, "Yikes, you work for Outcome Health. Do you ever worry that might be a stain on your resume, working for a fraudulent company?" And it put into context for me that there's no job security in the corporate world. One person in one department could make a mistake, or in this case, everybody at the executive level could collectively make a mistake and keep on making mistakes, and you might not be aware of it until it's too late. I remember looking at some of the sales guys who are making stupid money, who are probably making $300,000, $400,000 a year for some of them, and they're like, "How do I get another $300,000 to $400,000 sales job?" As a sales guy, you can go out and you can find one, but they're not easy to find. As I went on to learn, not all sales jobs are the same. If you're selling a bad product, it in a bad company, it's a pain. It's a struggle. That kind of turned me onto the whole idea of I can't rely on somebody else to be making the right decision for my own well-being, for my own financial well-being. So that kind of put me down the road of, okay, maybe I should start looking into ways to invest my money. And this was probably 2018. I remember looking at crypto, and in all retrospect, investing in crypto in 2018 probably would have been a good move. Water under the bridge, but I settled on real estate, and I'm really happy that I settled on real estate. And the reason why I ended up choosing real estate as the financial vehicle that I was going to focus on was because you can make cash flow. Cash flow is great. There's depreciation, which is great. Properties appreciate over time, and that's great. But the fourth kind of key pillar in real estate and making money in real estate that nobody really talks about is the loan pay down, right? So you buy a property with debt and somebody else is paying down that property for you. So in my mind, I'm like, shoot, I could screw up a lot here and I could still make money, right? Like I could still have a decent investment. I just have to hold on for the long term. And I'm fairly patient. This is probably something that I should be considering. Over the next 3 years, from that point up until 2021, books, podcasts, the Bigger Pockets podcast in particular, Michael Zuber's One Rental at a Time, his book and his YouTube channel. And I had to learn how to save money. I had to learn how to make money in my W-2. And then I had to learn everything about real estate, right? Like how do I evaluate a deal? How do I manage that deal? All these things that I had to learn over the course of 3 years until I ended up saving, I think it was about $25,000. And then COVID hit, everything went crazy, but I still stayed the course. I did not let that freak me out. A lot of people are like, oh, I was going to invest in real estate, but COVID and this whole eviction moratorium. Whereas my opinion was like, hey, interest rates are like nothing, right? And yeah, sure, there's an eviction moratorium, but most tenants from the people that I've been speaking to, because I built up a network, are still paying, the vast majority. And I think that when you talk to people, it's like 98, 99% of tenants kept on paying during COVID. There are some outliers that there's one story in particular that's going to be coming out in the not too distant future that were pretty brutal with people taking advantage of the eviction moratorium. But I didn't let that sidetrack me. I stayed focused. And then one of the key elements to all this was that I got married. And marriage has been incredibly beneficial for me. Just speaking on the financial side, when you have two people earning an income and focused on one goal, that's a lot of money that you're able to really focus in on building wealth. And so I was fortunate enough to marry an amazing woman who is also very focused into real estate and loves real estate. For her, it was more about the cash flow. Okay, we can replace bills with properties. Like that was her mindset. Like once she wrapped her head around that, she was like, oh, this is great. This is perfect. We just need to get enough properties. And so in 2021, we ended up buying our first property, a house in Milwaukee, and it was 99,000. It rents for 120, 100, 1,200 bucks a month. And if the Zillow estimate, and I've done a ton of tweets about how Z estimates are complete BS, so I feel bad referencing it, but the Zillow estimate does put it at about $130,000 now. That first deal was great, and my whole process for that first deal was like, hey, let's just get something that's going to be a ground ball, right? Let's just get on base. I don't need a home run. I just can't strike out. Like this cannot be a nightmare. Because I say that my wife is wonderful and she loves real estate. Like she was still coming around to the idea when we bought this first property. And part of me is just like, this can't go south because I don't want it to be a complete nightmare and just turn her off on the whole idea of real estate. Because once that happens, if we lose a whole bunch of money on this first deal, there might not be a second deal. But that first one, it's been great, no problems whatsoever. So we've really been blessed with that property. And since then, we've built a portfolio of 5 doors. We recently moved into our house hack outside of Chicago here in an amazing neighborhood that I would not be able to afford if it wasn't for this house hack, being able to offset the mortgage. It's been a long journey, and it was a very lonely and difficult first 3 years learning the business, learning all the skills that you need to learn to be a successful real estate investor. But these last 3 have just been outstanding. Really, it's been worth it at the end of the day.
That's amazing. I hadn't heard that story about the outcome health,
Yeah.
and what an interesting moment that must have been. Like you said, just coming to the realization, look how much is just outside of our control, no matter how good of an employee I am, no matter how invested I am in moving the company forward and being a good teammate and trying to grow my own skills. It's still so much is out of your hands. And then using that as a reason and a why for getting into something like real estate, which earlier we were talking about how you become the CEO of your portfolio and you do have more control, for better or for worse. You can influence the outcome much more directly and live or die by the result. And then how you found a partner in life who also has that aligned interest in real estate. And you guys took down a deal. There are multiple houses together now. What a cool story. And so did you say your first house you bought was actually out of state?
Yeah, so I've built my portfolio to mainly focus out of state, live in Chicago, invest in Milwaukee. Ton of reasons for that. Milwaukee is an affordable market. You can still buy houses for $100,000 that will rent for $1,200. Not to blow up the spot too much. I hope I'm not inviting a whole bunch of competition to come into my backyard, but it's been a good market for me. And also, I think that what's also been really important is starting out this whole real estate journey with a property manager. Because having a property manager, and the lady I have is just outstanding. She's been in the market for 40 years. She's coming up on retirement in the not too distant future, which is getting me a little bit nervous. But up until this point, she's been like an amazing teacher, being able to share like, hey, this is what it's like being a landlord. This is what it's like operating in this market. And just being so helpful to wrap my head around it, because you can study everything about real estate in books and podcasts. But until you start actually out there doing deals and managing tenants, Like probably in your case, there's been a whole bunch of stuff that's probably happened during your journey where it's just, wow, there's nothing in a book about this, right? So I think having a property manager to start out with, suggesting they're a good property manager is a great way to accelerate your learning and accelerate your ability to scale and build.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I think it's pretty hard to find a good property manager.
Yeah.
We're going through in Iowa, that's our out of state. Actually, all of our rentals are currently no closer than 1,000 miles away from where we live. Our furthest rental at this point is 3,000 miles away. But Iowa was our first truly out of state area where we had no roots, no previous connections. And we're on our third, we actually just parted ways with our third property manager there. And we were self managing from afar simply because we could not find reliable property management.
Hmm.
It's definitely probably the most important member of your team for an out of state
Oh,
portfolio,
absolutely.
but also,
Absolutely.
also the hardest to find.
Yeah, I view them as like the spider in the web, and I say that endearingly, right? The property manager, they're at the center of the web, and then across, then spanning out is our contractors, our agents, our accountants, are all the people that go into this industry. A good property manager have contacts for probably at least three or four, if not more, and they know who do people start keep going back to, who does good work, right? So when you get plugged in with a real good property manager, you also get plugged into their network and all the pros in that area, and you're able to know who you should and who you shouldn't be working with. So that's another like little hack that property managers are able to provide.
Definitely. And so on the house hack, you are doing some of the work yourself, right? I think you did some fixing up and even some renovation and all that,
Yeah.
right?
So how it is, I'll give you some numbers. We bought it for 730, which is very expensive for a duplex, if I do say so. $730,000 for a duplex is a lot of money. But we bought it for a number of reasons. The first one is that it's a side by side. So nobody's living above or below anybody else. We share one wall, but it's like a brick reinforced wall. So the soundproofing is really good. That's number one. Number two, the utilities are metered separately. I'm not paying their water bill. I'm not paying their gas or certainly not their electricity. So that was another pro. The other pro is that the people who lived here before, who we bought it from, they basically house hacked. They probably would have called it something different because they've been here for 30 years. But their owner's unit, the owner's unit, I should say, is just immaculate. It's beautiful. It's got an above ground pool, which little not I don't love, but there is an above ground pool. It's tarped off. The tenants decided they didn't want to use it. But four bedrooms, two baths. It's got a private backyard that's all fenced in that leads to a two-car garage. I'm like, that's an amazing unit. That's going to rent really well, really fast. Why don't we just rent that rear unit out, live in the former rental unit, and we're going to have to do a whole bunch of work to it. But that cuts our mortgage significantly down. We're living in one of the best neighborhoods in Illinois for about $1,200 per month, not counting utilities. That's just rent, my mortgage and taxes and insurance minus rent. So we're paying probably about the same that we were paying to live in a slumlordy one-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago. So it took me a really long time to be able to pull off a deal like this. But that just goes back to real estate, taking the long approach, doing the groundwork, saving your money, looking for a deal, and not trying to do a deal just to do a deal. Like last year, I only did one deal, and I I was really getting down on myself because the first deal, my first year where I was actually buying properties, I ended up buying three, and then that following year, I bought one, and I was just, man, am I missing something? Should I be doing more? Should I be trying to go off market? Like, I just felt really bad. But I used that time to save all that money until all of a sudden a incredible deal just fell into my lap. That was just like, wow, I gotta act on this, and thank God I've got the capital to be able to make it happen. But I'm sorry, I'm going away from your question. Your question was, did I do any work to it? The former unit that was rented out, the front unit, had not seen a day of love since the 1990s. It's been beat up, old appliances, old flooring. It just the people who used to live here had a dog. It smelled awful. There was carpet that again had not been probably steam cleaned since the 1990s. We had to do almost a full gut rehab on this front unit. New kitchen, new bathrooms, new flooring, ripping up all that carpet. There's still a lot that we need to do down the line, replacing the AC, replacing windows, but we've gotten to a point where it's habitable, and frankly, we love it here, and we're really happy with a lot of the decisions that we made. But that was probably a 4-month rehab that we went to be able to move into the property.
Thank you for deconstructing that. That's amazing. You shifted which unit you were renting. You decided to move into one that allowed the monthly expenses to be more economical for you. You identified all the work that needed to be done. And like you said, at the end of the day, you ended up with a $730,000 duplex in an amazing neighborhood in an area that you feel like you can be proud of and that it's going to grow over the long run. That's quite a cool story. And I also like what you said about don't do a deal just for the sake of doing a
Yeah.
deal. I always say that the unit count is a bit of a vanity metric. I do introduce in my bio, hey, this is how many rentals I own across 3 states and all that. But I'm also very much of the mind that like, I don't want to just buy a house just so I can say, okay, I'm Aaron, I own 9 houses now instead of 8. No, if I buy something, I want it to be the right deal for the right reasons with the right potential. And so, yeah, I can relate to that. Like starting to feel down on yourself a little bit. It's, oh, I haven't bought in a certain amount of time. It's like we don't buy just to buy. We buy with fundamentals in mind and long term potential. So that's a great point. So your job, you have a background in
hmm
sales, right? That's where your career has taken you. As you've been in sales since coming out of college.
Yep. Out of college, I went into sales because I was told you could make a lot of money and that you didn't need to take an exam or take a test to get a sales job. That was one of the big things in high school for me. It was like, okay, I don't want to take an exam to like get a job somewhere, right? I don't know, I would never be a nurse, but like, you have to take, I'm sure, plenty of exams to be a nurse, to be an air traffic controller. So I was just like, all right, let's take all of those jobs and just put them over here and focus on the stuff that I don't need to take a test on. Thank God you don't need to take a test to be a landlord.
And how has that career? Is it something that you enjoy doing? Is it something that you're passionate about? Are there skills that you feel like you've learned that you're really happy that this is what you are choosing to do for an occupation? Or what's your general sentiment towards career?
Sales, there are a lot of, I think I mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of bad sales jobs out there. Bad products, bad compensation programs, bad managers. And I guess you could say that with really any job, right? Any job could be bad. I've had 3 sales jobs so far. The first 2 were bad. The first one, obviously, because it was fraudulent. That was bad. The second one was bad management, bad product, but nothing was fraudulent, right? It took me a little bit that's the thing when you're in sales, is that it might take you a little bit to realize, hey, this product actually sucks. And once that happens, it's game over. You can't sell something convincingly that it doesn't work or is a waste of money or someone would be better off buying something else or not buying anything at all. So once that kind of happens, you're screwed. And that happened to me with my last job. And I'm like, man, this product sucks. And so I ended up leaving. So the sales job that I'm in now has been wonderful. And it's different. So when people think of sales, they think of like cold calling or like maybe being like a used car salesman or something like that. But that's just one type of sale. The sales that I like, that I'm particularly good at, is building a relationship with a manufacturer, in my case, to where they come back to me and they continue to buy. So for me, it's advertising. So I work for a media company that focuses in on a couple segments, people who run remodeling companies, people who are building custom homes. So from a manufacturer's point of view, whenever they're looking to reach the remodeling market or people who are building custom homes, they're like, oh yeah, I had a conversation with Dan 6 months ago or a year ago. Hey, let's call him up and see if we can't buy some ads because we've got this new product that we really need to promote. So I'm building relationships with people, and then sometimes they buy, sometimes they don't buy. And sometimes people buy all the time, month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year. So with this type of sale, it's just building up a big enough Rolodex, right? So I think I've built relationships with about 400 companies. Some relationships are better than others, but I like to think that about 400 people know me, know the companies, know the markets that I serve. So when it's important for them to reach those markets. They're like, oh yeah, I had a conversation with Dan. Let's see if we can't have a conversation with him again and buy some ads. So that's been a very fruitful sales position for me. I've done phone sales. I've done, you go and you present and then you hand everybody a contract and you hope that enough people sign it to make it worth your time. And that's a challenging game. That's a real challenging game. The job that I'm in now, I've been doing it for 5 years. I've been very good at it, and it's been very good to me. And it comes back to that whole hybrid approach that you have. I'm not trying to leave my job in the next 6 months. I've got no reason to. I'm doing the podcast because I love to do it. I'm investing in real estate as a investment and a retirement vehicle. And in the meantime, I'm able to go to conferences in Vegas and go have meetings in Manhattan and go all the way out to beautiful Lancaster, Pennsylvania to meet with manufacturers and stuff. It's been a very fun ride. It took me a while to get a job like this, and I'm really fortunate that I have.
That's so cool. And yeah, Dan, you really are a hybrid real estate professional, whether or not you call it that.
I
There
would.
are so many others. Yeah, no, I believe that there are a lot of people that love what they do. They have employment, gainful employment that provides for them and their family, that helps them meet the goals that they have. They're interested in real estate and maybe they either currently invest or they want to invest in tandem with their careers. And I think there's a beautiful path there. Like you said, you've got a lot of amazing things happening in your present. And by doing what you did, what, 5, 6 years ago, when you got interested in real estate and started making those first investments, you're setting yourself up for such incredible long term success, both with the skills you've built and the investments that you've made. I'm really excited to see where everything goes for you. I want to be respectful of your time here. We'll start to wrap things up, but I would love to know if you, so talking to Dan from 6 years ago, if you could go back and do anything different to either accelerate or prevent mistakes or just do what you did any differently, what might you change?
That's a great question. So 6 years ago, been right out of college. I'd still been working at Outcome Health. I bought a studio. Probably right around this time in downtown Chicago. It was a studio condo. It was $140,000. And I had it in my mind that buying a house or buying land, I guess you could call it, even though it was a studio, it was up in the sky. There was no grass associated with it. A year after graduating college was like this big merit of success, right? Like only the most successful people who graduated college buy a house, buy land after a year after they graduate. And I was hellbound on like, this is what I'm going to do. And originally I was going to house hack. I didn't know the term of it. I didn't know anything about it. And probably for the best, I didn't do it, where I'd buy a 2 bedroom and rent one of the bedrooms out. But I couldn't. I was making like $50,000 a year. You can't afford anything in the city of Chicago with that. At least nowhere safe or nowhere that you'd want to live. So I eventually, after months and months, I shouldn't say that. It was probably 2 months of searching. I was just like, let me throw in the towel. Maybe I'll just get a 1 bedroom or something. And then the agent that I was working with sent me this link of a studio on the corner of Addison and Lakeshore Drive, 5 blocks from Wrigley Field. It looked out onto Belmont Harbor. It was 550 square feet. It was like remodeled maybe 10 years before, so it was still somewhat current. And I fell in love with it. I was like, this is beautiful. This is an amazing place. And I ended up buying there. Lo and behold, when I got married, you can't have 2 people living in 500 square foot, even though we obviously loved each other. It's just too close. You can't, no place for anybody to go. So we ended up selling it, and I ended up losing probably about $20,000 on that. And then learned that the hard way, that the only people who buy studios are young, dumb kids right out of college, or a divorced dad, or the people that we ended up selling to, they wanted just a place to crash in the city. They lived in the suburbs. So the market is really limited, and it's limited by people who just don't want to spend a ton of money on a place. I would probably caution myself against doing that. I probably would say for me to rent in that building because the building was great, but to rent. I would have saved a lot more money, and I would have been able to probably buy something maybe even in 2019 if I hadn't made that choice. That's the advice I would give my younger self.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but that was every time I listen to you, I've been following you for a while. I learned something new. And that was unique and very tactical, but also very useful piece of information that I'm sure many of that our listeners will enjoy hearing. So, Dan, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find you, and how would you like them to interact with
Sh-
you when they do?
Sure. The podcast Landlord Horror Stories on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. My Twitter handle is Landlord Horror Stories. I think it's also Resilient REI as the profile name. But yeah, I'm most active on Twitter, and then the podcast comes out every Tuesday.
Sounds good. I will make sure all those links are in the show notes. And thank you again for taking some time to talk to me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I once again thank you for the inspiration to get this podcast started. And hopefully we'll be talking again real soon.
Awesome. Aaron, thank you so much, man. Keep crushing it.
Thanks.